Welcome back to another series of stories from facilitating architecture and design. With me today is Beija Nigl and Michael Plood. And from the organizers or the showrunners or co-conspiracies, as Andrea calls it, Andrew is with me. Hello, Andrew. And today we're going to hear about a story you brought in, Beija. Curious to
Yes.
hear what you brought.
So, yeah, I brought a story from a collaborative modeling workshop that I was facilitating. It was already quite some time ago. And it was basically the starting point for the Combo Prep Canvas because I figured that things were not going the way that I wanted them to go. And the story is as follows. So it was also a legacy software. It was built throughout 20 years. It was in production for quite some time. And they had this thing that it was running on Java 8 and the support for Java 8 was running out. So they had to somehow figure out what to do with that. We already had a team working with them who was actually using the data that came out of this legacy software, and they struggled a lot. So that's where we got into this whole project. And I was mainly talking to one of the product owners, and he was like, hey, we need to rebuild the whole thing. All the processes are crap. They're way too technical. Many things are not going. It's not working. When our team cannot work with the data that we get out of it. So that was the initial, like the start of this. Okay, we need to do a collaborative modeling workshop. We need to understand this legacy software. We also need to rebuild it because of this, like Java 8. And that's how it all started. And then we planned this workshop. We thought, okay, hey, let's do this. Let's start bringing all the stakeholders together, all the different departments. Let's understand all the processes. And what I usually do is that I have setting the stage sessions with everyone involved. So I take all the stakeholder groups. I don't do one-on-ones because the groups are bigger. So I take the groups that I expect to have similar doubts, motivations, thoughts on this, and then do setting the stage, like half an hour, and try to talk them through, okay, hey, this is what's going to happen in this workshop. So planned for an event storming workshop. And then the second day, let's see what comes out of the first day. And then we design it based on the outcomes. So I explain them what is going to happen. This is what we do. So they are not like overwhelmed, that they understand the motivation. And I also had this with the manager of this product owner that we had me in contact because I thought, hey, we do it with everyone. So we also do it with that person. And I wanted him to do like the introduction because he was like the owner of the whole process. And my assumption was that the product owner that I was most in contact with and his manager, that they were perfectly aligned because that's the impression that I got in previous meetings. Figured, it was 2 days prior to the workshop, well, he wanted to have this workshop to get a documentation of all edge cases so that we can rebuild basically the same thing. Whereas the product owner that I was talking to was like, hey, let's rethink the whole thing because it's not working. It's pretty buggy. There are edge cases that are coming from the business, but there are a lot of edge cases that are not business driven, but just because the implementation is not in a way that it should have been or could have been. And as it was just 2 days prior to the workshop, I was like, okay, let's go with this. We'll figure out, let's take the workshop also to show this manager, hey, where are we actually? And the problem is, or that's what I face and where I thought afterwards, okay, I could have done this maybe differently. And that's also why I would be also interested in maybe your perspectives or what we can dive into deeper is we started this workshop. I had this manager doing the introduction. And as he had this perspective, let's write the documentation, the introduction was shaped this way. And this set the stage for the whole workshop. And in the end, the workshop still was a success because it laid the foundation to get the conversation going afterwards to actually rethink this. But the workshop itself was rather exhausting because people were more aiming towards building a documentation of the processes as is, whereas rethinking a new process, because we had a lot of the main events that was like, oh, status 800 is this, status 300 is this. And if I have status 305, then there is a nightly run. And after the nightly run, it's another status. And they were highly relying on this nightly run. And all of these kind of things. So it was very, very technical. And it was only business people in the room. So it was very hard to get them to this thinking, okay, hey, what do we actually want to achieve? And so the workshop was really great, still because it was important to lay the foundation to get everything going, but it was not what we expected, like not what we wanted as a facilitator or the product owner to rethink the whole process. But it was also not writing a documentation, because event storming is not the way to write a documentation. So that's like the story that I would like to tell. And what I took out of it is that it's important to really get the people on board before, especially if you have people that are in a position of power, whether it's because of their manager or because of they are like long in the team or have a lot like, or are technical experts, and to really get them on board before on what is your intention, and not to rely too much if you have this goal to actually get somewhere in this workshop. And if the workshop is not just let's share and let's put everything through the room, which in the end was what happened, but that was not the initial goal of the workshop. So that's the story I would like to share. And to wrap it up, as I said in the beginning, this was the start for me for the Como Prep Canvas, because I felt like, okay, if I would have had some more guidance before to be like, what questions can help me if I'm a facilitator or if I'm a facilitating architect, it doesn't have to be a big workshop. It would have helped me to have more of a feeling like, okay, this is something that I or to make my gut feeling explicit, and by this tangible.
I think I've definitely been in that kind of situation, but like lots of different bits of that situation, actually. Like things that we're kind of not talking about, but I think is a bit like the one where they're not sure if they're mapping out the old system or if they're imagining the future and stuff. And I think you're right. Things like that the agenda for that does get kind of set, maybe not even explicitly sometimes, right, by the people who kick off these things, because I think it's smart to get the stakeholders to kick it off, and then you wonder later on why the workshop is going in one direction or not the other. The thing that I took, so I once saw Alberto Brandolini do an event storming thing for stupid numbers of human beings, and it was terrifying because it was just him on his own, but he kept emphasizing that we were playing, which was a really interesting kind of thing to me. He's like, let's play event storming. And that was really interesting because sometimes it allowed him to be more kind of in the space in between the two things, where he could be like, right, we are documenting all of this old stuff and what happens, but he'd be like, what happens? What happens if the system falls over and then we have to fall back to like the old process and things? It was really interesting but like you say, being aware of that stuff is super important.
Yeah, maybe it would have also helped, like if we talked about in the series of Michael also about people being maybe afraid of something or having like emotional attachments. And as it was also legacy software, people were very attached. People knew their way around with all the status codes. So if you move away of all these status codes and all this like nightly runs, they would have this feeling, okay, I don't know my work anymore. I don't know what I need to do. So taking also this emotional thing and taking them in the workshop to be like, hey, it's not about changing everything. You can still do your job. We take you along.
Yeah.
We don't want to make everything new and then you don't know your work.
Especially perhaps these days, right? Where people are like, this is maybe one of the few things, everything sounds like it's going to change and be all modern and robots are going to take over. And I'm like, this is the thing. I know the thing. Yeah, that's it kind of goes back to the empathy thing again.
Absolutely. And I think what sometimes really helps to totally change the context in these things. So when, especially in legacy situations like the one that you described, Beija, I very often say we are not talking about this legacy system here. This is not in the scope. Let's pull this out of the scope. Let's focus on the problem that this system solves. And this can be very tough for many people but the status code that you mentioned.
Or the file that's been updated. Yeah, I need the file. Yeah.
I have totally built systems where, and like you say, Beija, they totally know. And they'll have a whole conversation about message 3 versus message 7. And what happened? Oh, well, that's message 8. Did you ever see message 8? And meanwhile, if as a facilitator, you're like, there is no domains anymore suddenly, and they're just talking about 17 different numbers of messages.
But that was something that we also had in a different workshop where they wanted to go to more like, they had numbers for their entries in their shop. And all numbers, every digit in this number had a meaning. And they wanted to step away from this to be like, hey, if we onboard new people, then they would not know the numbers. Let's go to more something that is more speaking. But the old stuff was like, but I know the numbers. Like, I'm super fast with the numbers because I know every digit. I just see the number and I know what we're talking about. And I found it very hard to be like, okay, where do we want to go? Do we want to make onboarding easy for new people so they immediately understand and don't need much of explanation? Or do you want to be fast with all the numbers and the stuff that's already doing it? And this trade-off is something that also, especially as a facilitator, as you don't know, is like, is it just me that wants to understand the codes? Or is it like, if everyone else is clear, should I, just because I don't understand it, then facilitate it in the way that we should go away from it just because I don't understand it?
So, one big conflict that your story reminds me of, and I'm curious how you cope with it, is sort of like you have knowledge of architecture and design, same as everyone in this call, right? And then you want to facilitate. And on one hand, in that facilitation, you want to sort of like be neutral in a way, right? You want the group to come up with that. But then the group wants to go left, sort of like documenting it, I think, what I hear from your story. But you, no, wait, come on, let's focus on this. So there's a conflict of interest there in a way, I guess. So how did you feel about that during the session? How did you handle that during the session or even before the session? Because you don't want to overstep your boundaries in a way. You don't want to show your color. Like, no, we shouldn't do that. I think that you might not want to do that. Not sure, maybe looking back, you should have done that. How did you go with that? And how did you feel during that facilitation?
I think for that specific workshop I was sharing, it was very difficult because the goal was not clear enough. So let's say me and the product owner that had the prior discussions, one goal was clear, but the manager who was like owning it, who was the sponsor, had a different goal. If I have an aligned goal, what I can do is I can always refer to that aligned goal and zoom out again, like, hey, we want to achieve this goal. This is what I would suggest to get to this goal. This is what the room wants. Where do we want to go? Which road do we want to go down? In the end, it's not up to me. I want you to succeed, so to say, as a facilitator. But if I don't have this aligned goal, I cannot refer to it. And that was my problem in this workshop, that I had this goal of the sponsor and I had our goal, and there was a mismatch. So it was hard. And also at some point, this manager was not in the room anymore because he had important meetings to do, which made it even more difficult politically to be like, okay, which goal to I refer to? And also made it hard to realign on this goal during the session. Because this could also have been an option if we have the people in the room to say, okay, hey, I feel like, hey, we're not aligned on the goal. Let's quickly do a session, check in on the goal, half an hour, 20 minutes, and then you can move on from that point.
But I think that's an even harder bit, right? Where you have a sponsor that has goal A, leaves the room, and then the group goes to another goal because they got an insight, which hopefully happens, because that's great. You get an insight like, oh, no, we have never seen it this way.
Yeah.
How would you go about that, knowing that the manager really probably has some own agenda, and then the group says, no, we need to go that way because we feel that's important. Now you get the conflicting goals between the sponsor and the group.
I mean, in that case, as the manager was out of the room for basically most of the afternoon, he just came back for the closing round. And in this closing round, there was no space to ask many questions. So he was just more as an observer. And then afterwards, we had a session with him, not a one-on-one, because it was two facilitators and him, where we basically did a wrap-up of the whole workshop. We explained hey, that was the initial goal. This is what we observed. This is the outcome that had the workshop. This is in conflict to the outcome that we wanted to have. But this is why it's super helpful still, because we had a lot of insights. They wanted to have all edge cases documented. But one insight that we got, for example, from this workshop was there are business edge cases, but they're also edge cases because of data quality, but they're also edge cases because of the implementation as it's currently. Because people said, I don't have to check this and that date field again because I don't know if it's checked before, which is something that you can solve. There's a lot of these edge cases that could be solved technically that are not business edge cases. And this was, for example, an insight that was very important. And as he was not there during this part of the workshop, we shared this afterwards with him and be like, hey, this is when we took the McKinsey slide, so to say. I'd be like, hey, this is the outcome and this is our recommendation, what we would do in your case. And that's when the point where I'm often very happy that I'm a consultant because I really can put the finger to it and I can say the truth that is maybe not the one people want to hear because I see this as my task. This is what I get paid for. And so this is how we dealt with this in that situation.
Yeah.
What's the reaction on that?
He was great. Like, he was very grateful, thankful for it, and was like, okay, because that's also what we told him, like, hey, now it's up on you because you're the manager. You need to think of what you want to do with it. And you need to decide basically which road do we want to go. This is our recommendation. We help you with the next steps, but you need to digest this. You need to think, is that the way? Because we need your buy-in. He basically just took it with him, thought about it, and then came back to us later.
It's interesting. Like, you're telling him the ground truth of his organization, whether or not, I'm assuming it's a man, right? Like, this might be what you want, but there are these other things which when you leave the room, everyone else talks about. This is like ground truth is this new word I've discovered last week. And, but it is, right? They're all relevant factors which might be getting in the way or might smooth the path of this, right? If he wants to get buy-in for something, then he might be able to take all these. And yeah, like you said, Beija, the reflection of this, all of that to the person is kind of useful.
Do you prepare for these settings? So, of course, there's the risk of rejection. So, how dare you? Yeah. I mean, of course, as an external consultant, it's sometimes easier on the one hand, but on the other hand, you, of course, run the risk of losing a customer, a consulting gig, if you make someone really angry. Do you prepare for these situations, or do you just go in there and say, okay, I go with the flow?
I try to prepare the storyline because what is what that I want to bring across? And what helps a lot is for me in my preparation, but also that these conversations actually work most of the time, is to think, okay, what is our mutual goal? What do we both want to achieve? And it's not that I want to achieve something that is harming the other person, but I want their best. I want the company's success. And if I make this clear to myself, and if I make it clear in a conversation, this lays like the groundwork to actually be heard. Still, it might be that people need time to digest a different opinion or something that might be uncomfortable. That, for example, in that case, this manager might need to have some uncomfortable conversations afterwards to get buy-in of other people that he needs. But if I have this clear framing for myself, okay, hey, I want their success. For me, it worked quite well to bring this across. And that made it also easier to be like, to put the finger in the wound, to be like, hey, I know this hurts, but if we want to get somewhere, unfortunately, we have to do this. And I totally understand if that might not be the way that you want it to be. I feel that. But sometimes we have to deal with what is there. We cannot wish for whatever. And we have to work with that. And I have the feeling that also helps people to be seen. We had it in your story, Michael, to be like, okay, people want to be seen, want to be respected, and also their fears or their work. And if we put everything on the table, this helps. I have the feeling. And sometimes also making it explicit to be like, hey, it's okay if this might take time. It's okay if that might feel frustrating. It's okay if that's not what we wanted to. But also stating, hey, we can get there. Be like optimistic. And hey, we can achieve this. It might be a long way, but I see light in the end of the tunnel, so to say.
Okay.
Yeah. That's basically how I prepare, if you want to call this preparation. It's more mental.
It's preparation.
It is preparation. So yeah, I guess that the preparation is important. Did you ever experience, well, besides this one, where you got into a situation that you couldn't prepare or there weren't time to prepare? You knew, okay, this needs preparation. What do you do in that case? Did you ever experience that? Or
If I'm in a situation where I feel like I should have prepared, but now I don't have the time anymore.
yeah, or not facilitator, and that facilitator didn't prepare, and you're in that session, and the facilitator actually didn't do the goal, right? Have you ever been in that situation? And what do you do then?
It depends. It's like I've been in similar situations, not exactly what you described, but what helps me if, like, for example, if I have a facilitator that I feel like, okay, they didn't prepare well, it depends on what type of person they are. If they want to run their show, let's put it that way, then I don't have that much space to change something. What I can still do is I can ask questions and I can propose things. Be like, hey, would it maybe make sense to do this? Would it maybe make sense to do this? Or I also be like, hey, I don't get it. Sometimes it's also this, like, be okay, hey, maybe I'm the only one, but I didn't understand this. Right? Can we please realign on the goal? Because then I feel like I didn't get it. And if you go with this, it does not always work. It depends on the facilitator, it depends on the people, but this helps to make them maybe realign, readjust. And even if you yourself understood it, sometimes you have the feeling other people didn't understand it. And then stepping up for them and be like, hey, can we just quickly check in on this?
Yeah, so more from your own need at that point where you say, that's what I try to do, right? So saying, I have this need, I'm not sure, I don't understand the goal yet. Can we make that more clear? Instead of like, yeah, we need to set the goal, which is, yeah, that's a good heuristic, right? So what happens when you see this happening in a session and you're not the facilitator, you don't want to overstep your boundaries or the facilitator in that way. So I think talking from your own needs is a very good heuristic.
And you also don't know. Sometimes it's also very unconscious. Maybe the facilitator was just too busy with other things. Maybe the room was not working. Maybe they were in a hustle on the way to the workshop, and that's why they had everything prepared, but they just didn't think of it in that moment. And maybe they're grateful for you asking this question. Or at least I am. If I'm forgetting things and people raise it and be like, oh, cool, thanks.
We always have that. So yeah, going back to the previous episode, right, where you say, well, it doesn't matter that person, that facilitator isn't making mistakes or is a bad facilitator. They just might made a small mistake that everyone can make, because we've all been in a situation thinking, oh, so yeah, that really helps if there's a person in the room saying, hey, I have this need. Yeah. All right. Thanks for your story and the insights. And this was another episode. And like, subscribe. We have a Discord channel. You're both there, right? So you can talk about this more. If you have any more questions, you can always join our growing community. So hope you enjoyed this show and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.